If you're watching this video, you're interested in learning how to dehydrate, are a beginning dehydrator, or even an experienced dehydrator that wants to review the basics. You know, dehydrating has been going on for eons. The ancient Egyptians used the sun to dehydrate fish and poultry. The Europeans had still houses where they dehydrated meats and different vegetables. But then it kind of grew out of favor until the 1960s for backpacking, because backpackers wanted something light and nutritious to be able to take with them in their backpack. So we started learning a little bit more about dehydrating in the 1960s. Well, today I think it's thriving. A lot of people are interested in dehydrating, and there's a lot of individual pieces to know, but it's really easy to do. I mean, basically, you just take the moisture out of whatever you're dehydrating, right? Well, there's a little more to it. Now, there's many types of dehydrating. I already mentioned, sun or solar dehydrating. Some people dehydrate in their oven. Some just hang. Like here are a bunch of beans from last year that I strung through. See it a little bit different here. And hung up in my closet, and they all dehydrated. And believe me, this makes a great dish when you rehydrate them. But today we're going to talk about the kind of dehydrating that's done in an electric appliance. Now, for electric dehydrators, I do have to mention they're kind of two basic kinds. It kind of depends on what the airflow is. You have the airflow that is more vertical, from the bottom or from the top down, or from the back, which is more horizontal. If you think of the Excalibur dehydrators, those are the box dehydrators, and they have the airflow in the back. Now, they are the pricier dehydrators, but they are well worth the money, and they have a very even flow of temperature, which is important. Some of the higher end stackable dehydrators, such as some of the higher end Nescos, also are well rated, and those are some of your vertical dehydrators. There are dehydrators that you can get for $25, and there's ones that you can buy for in excess of $500. So just know that the really inexpensive ones, you gotta be careful. Those aren't something that you'd probably want to be making jerky with. But before you buy, check out what model was right for you. Some people love the Nesco dehydrators because you can add additional trays and they don't take up as much space. And other people would say they would not use anything but an Excalibur dehydrator. Really up to you. It also depends on how much money you have to buy the appliance and where you want to store it. In my case, I have an Excalibur. I got a 5-tray one for my kids for Christmas one year, and I have been using it weekly ever since. I love it. It has a 10-year warranty. It is very, very well made. It's easy to clean. I just put the sheets and the trays into the dishwasher. I love it. And if you want a bigger one, they also have a 9-tray one. So, I love my Excalibur, but other people love their Nesco or other type of appliance. So do your research before you buy. So why dehydrate? Well, maybe you're a mom with young children and you want a way to make some nutritious homemade snacks like fruit leather. Maybe you're a hunter and you bagged that big buck and you want to make your own venison jerky. Maybe you actually are a fisherman and you bagged that big salmon and you want to make what they call salmon candy, another type of jerky. Or maybe you're a backpacker and want to make your own meals to take camping with you. Or a raw food enthusiast and you need to keep the heat under 115 degrees to still be considered raw food. Or maybe you're just like me. You have a big garden and I freeze, but I also dehydrate the bounty from my garden. I mean, dehydrating is just a great way to increase the food in your food pantry. So there are advantages to dehydrating. When you take the moisture out of food, it weighs a lot less, it compacts, and it takes a lot less room to store. It can give you healthier snacks. And it can also help you avoid food wastage. You know, you buy vegetables that you need, you put them in your refrigerator and realize you only need this much for the recipe and the rest there. Well, before they turn all brown and shriveled up, why not dehydrate them so you can use them in the future? Yes, you do lose some nutrients when you dehydrate your food. But you know what? That's true of any preservation technique, not just dehydrating. In dehydrating's case, you lose vitamin A and vitamin C. But overall, your food is still very nutritious and delicious. Now, I want to add just one warning. The calories in that full, fresh apricot are the same calories in that little dried apricot. So if you end up eating a handful of dried apricots, remember, all the original calories are still there. Now, what supplies you need other than, of course, your electric dehydrator? Well, a lot of these things are things you already have in the kitchen. Now, you might want some ascorbic acid or some lemon juice. That can help for certain vegetables retain the color and some of the nutrients. Also a good idea to have some parchment paper on hand. This can help avoid having sticky trays. And you also might want to buy some silicone pads. These are for the tray, and it's really easy to get things off. And these just go into your dishwasher, so they're really easy to clean. Now, something I use a lot too is a coffee grinder. I got this at a garage sale, and I use it entirely only for my dehydrating. I make powders from it, you know, like garlic powder, onion powder, kale powder, all kinds of powders, but I use this coffee grinder to grind them up. I don't recommend you using your regular coffee grinder because you might get some really odd tasting coffee afterwards. Something else that I find very useful is a mandolin slicer. And when you're making potato slices, this is indispensable. I love it. But you can use it for a lot of other things that you're going to dehydrate also. And it's nice to have a vacuum sealer. Just really helps you preserve your dehydrated goods for storage. But none of these that I've mentioned are essential. None of these you have to have in order to dehydrate. Now let's talk about preparation for dehydrating. I think the first thing you should do is really read your manual well. It has a wealth of information in it, and it'll tell you temperatures and a lot of other information that's important for dehydrating. Now, I also encourage you to get other books. This is my favorite dehydrating book. It is called the Ultimate Dehydrator Cookbook, and it is by Tammy and Stephen Gangloff and September Ferguson. Really, I mean, it's a thick book. It has a lot of recipes in addition to how-tos for dehydrating each type of vegetable, fruit, or even nuts. Second, before you start to prepare, turn on your dehydrator to the desired temperature. That's just like preheating your oven. Then it'll be ready to go when you're ready to put your trays into your dehydrator. Well, this goes without saying. Keep a clean work environment. It's the same as for canning or doing any other food prep. Make sure your hands are clean. You may want to wear plastic gloves, that's up to you. But make sure you keep your area where you're preparing your food to be dehydrated as clean as possible. Unless using previously frozen vegetables, a lot of vegetables are required to be blanched before you dehydrate them. This blanching process preserves the color of the vegetable, preserves some of the vitamins, and makes it stay fresher and protects from certain pathogens. Now, the blanching process is that you put your veggie into boiling water for a specified time, you drain that water, and you put them into cold ice water. Drain that, and then they're ready to dehydrate. Now, blanching times vary depending on your elevation and the vegetable you're blanching. Here's a table that lists blanching times, and these times are the same whether you freeze or you are dehydrating your food. And I put the website down below, the info for this video also. Now, you don't have to blanch if you are dehydrating frozen vegetables. You just open the package, put them on the tray, and dehydrate them because they've already been blanched in the process commercially. Next, try to have uniform slices. This is where a mandolin can come in handy. And the reason being is that you want things to be the same thickness so they approximately dry at the same time. Try not to overlap your slices on your tray or food on your tray because this can block airflow and things won't all get done at the same time. Now the exception to that is if you're doing greens, you can just kind of layer them because they are not going to lay flat and they are light enough that you do not have to have them all separated from each other. But in most cases, don't overlap. Now be careful if you're planning on making jerky with your dehydrator. Not all dehydrators are really rated to make jerky well. According to the Wisconsin Cooperative Extension, the two that they tested that did well was Excalibur and the Nesco Garden Master. The reason being is that they have to maintain that constant temperature throughout the process, and some dehydrators cannot do that. If you're making wild game jerky, you have to be careful because your meat could contain the trichinella parasite, not something you would want to get, especially in your brain. So there's special precautions you need to go through. The best thing is to freeze the meat no more than 6 inches thick for at least 30 days. You may also want to marinate the meat first in a brine before you actually dehydrate it. Another safety precaution is to steam or roast the meat and get it up to 160 degrees before you put it in the dehydrator. That can help protect from E. coli infection. I love venison jerky, but be careful and make sure you are following the correct safety precautions. And you can find more information on this on your local cooperative extension office, and all of them have websites. Just look for wild game dehydrating. I also want to mention mushrooms. I routinely each spring dehydrate extra morel mushrooms that we find, and I know how to identify them. But please understand that the process of dehydrating does not take out any toxins from mushrooms. So make sure that you know that the mushrooms you're picking and dehydrating are safe for your family to eat before you dehydrate them. I'm showing you a slide from my Excalibur menu on the times and temperatures recommended. You want to always follow the temperatures recommended in your manual. And you might think, well, why not just turn that temperature up higher and it'll get done faster? Well, the problem is case hardening. What can happen is the outside of what you're trying to dehydrate gets a kind of hard case in it, but the middle isn't completely dehydrated. And then what can happen is mold will form in the middle, and you have a product that must be destroyed. So always follow the temperature recommended in your manual. Now, especially if you have the stackable round type of dehydrators, you're going to have to rotate your trays more often. But even with the box size Excalibur dehydrators, I do take trays and move them around, or even move them in a different position, because the things on the outside very often get done before on the inside, so I might move away the contents of the trays. So you do have to rotate trays occasionally. Now, a little science behind dehydrating is the more sugar something has, the less time it needs to be dehydrated, because the sugar is a preservative. And that is why with fruit, generally you do it till it's more flexible, where very often with vegetables, you get them till they're brittle because they don't have a lot of sugar content. And I get this question all the time on my videos, but how long does it take to dehydrate this? Well, there are no absolute times. Usually you'll see something like, 4 to 8 hours. Wow, that's a huge time. You'll see this expanse of time because dehydrators are different. Depends on the amount of humidity in the air. It depends on the thickness of what you're trying to dehydrate. Anyway, a lot of features. So You can't just say it's 4 hours and you're done. You always have to test for doneness. Now, vegetables are sufficiently dry when they're brittle. They can break instead of bend. Whereas fruit very often is more pliable, kind of like leather. You can bend it over. Now, I found this handy guide that helps tell you how you can tell when your vegetable or fruit is really done. It's from the Colorado Extension website, and it also gives blanching times, but it is listed for elevations of 3,000 to 5,000 feet. So lower elevations will require slightly less time for blanching, but this really gives you an idea if something should be brittle, supple, what should it be to know that you're really done. If in doubt, put it back in for another 15 to 30 minutes and test again. It is better to over dry something than to under dry it. Now, when I say brittle, if you have corn or peas that are dehydrated, you can actually take a hammer and they pound them and they will shatter into a whole bunch of pieces. And that means they were dehydrated enough. But now if you have herbs, let's say you take 2 leaves and you rub them together, they're going to end up all little pieces. So yep, you have dehydrated them enough. Now with fruit, it's a little bit different. They say if it's sticky, it's icky. But in most cases that's true. You don't want your fruit too sticky. It could be just slightly. And if you're making fruit leather, it might be just a little sticky. But as long as you can easily pull it off your sheet, then it's fine. Experience is going to be one of the things that helps you as you go through this process. Now there's one more thing you have to consider when you're doing fruit as opposed to vegetables, and that is conditioning. For fruit, you're trying to remove 80% of the water. So 20% is still left in your fruit. But you have to be careful that all your pieces are uniform. And to be sure, you do the conditioning process. After you take your fruit out of the dehydrator, put it in a container. You can actually use your canning jars, fill it up 2/3 full, put a lid on it, and keep it in a dark place for 12 days or more. And each day come in and kind of shake it up. And what you're doing is you want to check, is there any little droplets of water, condensation on the lid, any mold, any spoilage. If you start to see condensation, put it right back in the dehydrator and dehydrate it longer. If you start to see mold, throw it away. But this way you make sure that something you're going to put into long-term storage is actually as dehydrated as it needs to be. So always condition your fruit after pulling it from the dehydrator. Now let's talk about storage. The first thing you need to do is label your items. Look at this, it's 2015 tomato powder. But if I didn't have that on there, I could think this was sweet pepper powder. They can look the same from red pepper. So make sure you label the date you processed it and what is the contents of the jar. That is really important. So you need to store your food in a dark, cool place. For many of us, that's our basements. And your enemies for long-term storage are halt, humidity, air, light, and the temperature. You want to keep your stored foods away from light, so you want it in a dark space or in a dark container. And the cooler temperatures are better for longer term storage. So food stored at 80-degree temperatures or above will only keep for 18 months or less. So it's great to have a cool cave-like space to store your dehydrated food. Now, what do you store your dehydrated food in? Well, you can do it in a Ziploc bag as long as you get as much air out as possible, but this isn't the best way to do it. It's better to use vacuum sealer bags or Mylar bags. Or what I like to use is vacuum packed canning jars. In the beginning, I did use the vacuum packed bags, the plastic bags, and I put them on my shelf downstairs. And guess what? Little mice went into the corners, chewed into it, and ruined what I had dehydrated. So I learned if I was going to use those vacuum sealer bags, I wanted to make sure to put them in another plastic container so the rodents couldn't get at them. But also I learned that if something had a sharp edge, which a lot of vegetables do, then they could actually break through the bag, and again, then air would destroy the product. So a lot of people store their dehydrated goods in Mylar bags and then in plastic buckets. You can also just put it directly in plastic buckets and use oxygen absorbers. But I prefer this method. This is a nice size for me for dehydrating, and it stacks well on my shelves. And people will say, but how long does it last? And again, you can't answer that question either, right? It's going to depend on the temperature. Some people say dehydrated goods can last more than 20 years. Depends where they're being stored. Some say 5 years maximum. One thing is, very often the food looks the same but is starting to have nutrients leached out of it. So it's best to rotate your dehydrated foods. If you want to use your dehydrated stuff, you're going to have to rehydrate it. Well, what does that mean? Well, you can add boiling water or cool water. Boiling water is generally faster, but you can let it rehydrate it in just regular water, but you shouldn't leave it on your countertop for longer than 30 minutes. You should then put it into your refrigerator for your rest of your rehydration time. Now, this is a handy Excalibur manual chart that shows that sometimes additional water is needed, and it shows you for what products and how much water is needed. Again, your manual is an excellent resource for you. And there are other uses for a dehydrator, especially like the Excalibur, the box type dehydrator. You can take out your trays and you can make yogurt in there. You could raise bread in there. You can make cottage cheese. A lot of things you can do in that type of dehydrator. Now you can also use your regular dehydrators and make spice blends, make different powders, make your own teas. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with a dehydrator. I really consider it an indispensable appliance for my kitchen. Oh, I almost forgot. One other thing you can do, if one of your family members doesn't do your potato chip bag real tightly, you can just put the potato chips or stale crackers in your dehydrator for just a short period of time, and they'll be crispy just like new. Well, I hope I've inspired you with this video. I hope you will dehydrate it. It really isn't hard. Just follow some of the simple rules, and you can make your own fruit leathers and your own healthy snacks, your own teas, and your own fruit and vegetable powders. I mean, it's a wonderful appliance to have in your kitchen. And I have a playlist right here, if you want to click on it, that has over 30 videos on how to dehydrate certain things, to make powders, to make leathers, and how to use some of those dehydrated things in actual recipes. So I hope you'll check that out. As always, I so much appreciate your support, and all I can say is, happy dehydrating.